So now finally we can talk about the first completely reversible cycle, and in fact the first cycle in the course. It's called the Carnot Cycle, and it is a completely reversible cycle, so it's the best heat engine we could ever hope to build. We can't, by the way, build it because there's no such thing as completely reversible processes. If we had them, they would take an infinite amount of time to accomplish. But if our question is, what's the best we can ever do? Well, this is it. Okay, this is the limit. And notice that this cycle will not be 100% efficient because we've discovered that we have to throw away some waste thermal energy. We can't take thermal energy and convert it all into work. But this will be the closest we can get to it. So from state 1 to state 2, what we're going to do is have a piston cylinder device where we've got, say, some gas at a temperature T sub H. It's the same temperature as our thermal energy reservoir. And so we're going to allow the piston to expand, doing work, going from state 1 to state 2, while we transfer thermal energy into the system via the thermal energy reservoir. Since we can't have a difference in temperature, this is an infinitesimal difference, it'll take an infinite amount of time to go from state 1 to state 2, but that's okay, because we're just thinking about it, we're not actually doing it. Now, if you're looking at this all and you're saying, well, boy, you're throwing around a lot of terms like infinity, this sounds a lot like calculus. Well, in a sense it is. We're discovering limits of things. So this is not an exercise in futility. This is discovering something that's really important. So if you understand all this, great. If you don't, stay with me and try to get as much of it as you can, because we're going to come up with something that's really important here in just a little while. So our first process, from state 1 to state 2, the pressure is going to drop as the volume expands, because all we're really doing is holding the temperature constant. But we are getting some work out of this first initial process while we transfer heat in an amount QH. From state 2 to state 3, what we're going to do is insulate the head of the cylinder and allow the piston to continue to expand, doing work from state 2 to state 3. And you should follow this on the PV diagram as well in the center of the screen. So from state 2 to state 3, the gases will continue to expand, but if we're not putting heat in, then the temperature of the gases have to drop, because the work has to come from somewhere, right? The energy for the work has to come from somewhere. It's coming from the gas. So we're going to allow the piston to expand such that the temperature of the gases drop from TH to a predetermined temperature TL, and that's the process from state 2 to state 3. Now there's names for these processes so far, or descriptions of them. So from state 1 to state 2, the first process, we've got so-called reversible isothermal expansion. It's an expansion because the gases are expanding, doing work. It's reversible because there's no irreversibilities here. Even the heat transfer is occurring at the exact same temperature. And it's isothermal because the temperature of the gases remain constant. From state 2 to state 3, we've got so-called reversible adiabatic expansion, where again it's reversible and expansion as before, but this is adiabatic. In other words, no heat transfer expansion. The next process in the cycle, to get us almost back to where we started, is reversible isothermal compression from state 3 to state 4, where we're putting work into the piston, compressing the gases, but not allowing the gases to increase their temperature. Rather, any excess energy in the gas is immediately transferred into a thermal energy sink at temperature TL. Okay, so we've got a different thermal energy reservoir here, and this is where we're throwing away waste thermal energy. Then from state 4 to state 1, this is where we're going back finally to arrive where we began, with reversible adiabatic compression. So there's no heat transfer here. We're putting our insulation back on the top of the cylinder, but we keep putting work into the piston in order to compress the gases such that they go from TL back up to TH. Now the amount of work we get out from state 1 to state 2 and 2 to 3, that sum of work is greater than the work we have to put in from state 3 to 4 plus 4 to 1. And you can see that by considering the areas beneath each of these processes. Remember, this is a PV diagram. So the area underneath each of the processes represent the amount of work associated with that process. In other words, it represents the boundary work. So from state 1 to state 2, imagine the area underneath that curve. Okay, so you see that it's quite a bit of area. 2 to 3, less area, but still a significant amount. And then 4 to 3, there's less area under that curve, then 1 to 2, or perhaps 2 to 3. And then from 4 to 1, you can imagine the area under that curve going down to the volume axis. And you can see that the sum of the work from 3 to 4 and 4 to 1 is less than the sum of the boundary work from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, just graphically by looking at the figure we have here. So this is the Carnot cycle. It's completely reversible. It is not 100% efficient because it recognizes the necessity of throwing away QL, but it's as efficient as we could ever hope to be. It is a completely reversible cycle. So in other words, we could actually reverse it, right? We could run these processes in reverse and pump thermal energy from a low temperature source to a high temperature sink. Notice a subtle change has happened in the PV diagram. The direction of QL and QH have been changed. So we're operating the cycle counterclockwise, whereas before we were operating it clockwise. In fact, that's a general rule. On a PV diagram, a clockwise operating cycle produces work, whereas a counterclockwise operating cycle requires work to pump heat. Okay? So this Carnot cycle is actually very useful for comparison to real heat engines and to real refrigerators and heat pumps. The principles we get from the Carnot cycle, I haven't proven this yet, I'll show you this in a second, but the principles we get from the Carnot cycle are twofold. Number one, the efficiency of an irreversible heat engine is always less than the efficiency of a reversible heat engine operating between the same two reservoirs. So the Carnot cycle is the best we can do. I haven't proven it yet, but I'll show you proof of it in just a moment. And the efficiencies of all reversible heat engines operating between the same two energy reservoirs are always the same. So the Carnot principles tell us that if we could build somehow a Carnot engine, it would be the highest efficiency possible. Or any engine that is completely reversible, if we could build them, they would produce the highest efficiency possible. Understand we never can, because we can never tie together completely reversible processes, because completely reversible processes do not exist. So any engine that we build in the real world will have an efficiency capped or limited by the Carnot efficiency. There is no such thing as a real engine that has a higher efficiency than a reversible heat engine. So let's prove at least the first Carnot principle. What was it again? It was that the efficiency of irreversible heat engines is always less than the efficiency of reversible ones, as long as they're operating between the same two thermal energy reservoirs. Now let's say, you know what? All of this sounds like a bunch of bunk. Maybe in reality it's possible to make an irreversible heat engine that's better than the Carnot efficiency, or any reversible heat engine, by the way. Well, let's consider that. Let's just say that that's right. Now we're going to prove by considering what we think to be untrue, okay? And we'll see where it leads us. So let's say that we could build an irreversible heat engine that was more efficient than a reversible one. What would that mean? What that would mean is that this irreversible heat engine would pull in thermal energy and convert a higher percentage of that energy into work than the Carnot cycle does. And so the amount of waste energy that it throws away to the low temperature sink, figure A on the left hand side, would be less than the amount of waste heat that the reversible engine throws away. Okay? So you see the note there, QL irreversible is less than QL reversible. This is assumed, okay? We're assuming that, you know what, Carnot cycle, who cares? Who cares about reversibility? We can do better with a real engine. Okay. If that's the case, then couldn't we consider a reversible heat engine on the right-hand side, where the same amount of heat's coming into the engine, it's producing less work and throwing away more QL, right? But that reversible heat engine is exactly reversible. We can make it operate in reverse because the principle here is that all those reversible processes are, well, reversible, right? We can get the exact same thing back by running it in reverse. So let's do it. Let's take the reversible heat engine and let's run it in reverse. So now we've got the dotted flows. You see those arrows on the right-hand side of figure A. We're putting work into this cycle now in order to pump heat from the low temperature reservoir to the high temperature reservoir. These would just be the same magnitude of flows as they were before, just in the opposite direction. Now, if we size the reversible heat engine and the irreversible heat engine such that they originally took in the same amount of heat QH, well, now the reversed one on the right-hand side is shoving thermal energy into the high temperature reservoir in the exact same quantity as the irreversible heat engine is pulling down. And now remember, we assumed that QL reversible is more than QL irreversible. Therefore, the flow from the low temperature thermal reservoir to the reversible heat engine is a bigger flow. It's a bigger QL than the QL from the irreversible heat engine by our assumption. So if we assume that the reversible heat engine has been reversed, well, then the work flowing into it is less than the work flowing out of the irreversible one, because again we assumed that the irreversible heat engine produced more work than the reversible one. So what that means is that the difference in the work flows is in our favor, right? The irreversible heat engine is producing more work than the reversible heat engine would have consumed if we tie these two things together, where now we have a refrigerator from our reversible heat engine. Okay? And so we're producing a net amount of work, which is the difference between the irreversible work flow out and the reversible work flow into the reversible heat engine. And by the way, since the heat flow into the reversible heat engine is bigger than the heat transfer from the irreversible one down, well, then the net effect is that we've got a heat flow into the combined heat engine. The heat engine plus the refrigerator, the reversible one that's been reversed plus the irreversible heat engine. Now notice that the upper flow completely cancels, and so we don't need it anymore. And what do we find that we have? What are we left with? Well, we are left with a device that does nothing but bring in thermal energy and produce work. We have broken the Kelvin-Planck statement of the second law, which, by the way, remember, we believe that because we believe energy is conserved, and we believe that we cannot build a device that will allow thermal energy to flow from cold to hot. If we ever find a device, I don't care if it's a black hole or whatever it is, that does this, that can take in thermal energy from a low temperature source and send it out to a high temperature source without any work input, then all bets are off in all of this. But we've never found such a device. So this breaks the Kelvin-Planck statement, and by extension the Clausius statement of the second law. And therefore, if we believe those things, then this cannot be done. In other words, the Carnot cycle, or any reversible cycle, is the most efficient. It's the highest. It's the best. We can't go past that. Okay, and basically, it's essentially the same to saying that heat doesn't flow from cold to hot, and we can't find a device to do it. Okay, that's what we're saying here. So we've proven the first Carnot principle. If you followed it all, great. If you don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world. You can just take my word, I hope, or the book's word, better yet, that there's no way to do this that we know of. You can prove the second Carnot principle, which is that all reversible heat engines have the same efficiency, by replacing the irreversible heat engine with a reversible one, assuming one has a higher efficiency than the other, and essentially you end up breaking the Clausius or the Kelvin-Planck statement of the second law. So again, you can prove both of these by considering that they're wrong and seeing where that leads you.